No problem. So let's start with your paper, The Dangers of Stochastic Parrots. It came out in 2021. It was written around the same time that LLMs were emerging, but it was before ChatGPT had actually launched, right? But there was usage, there was experimentation within the developer community and research community. So from the previous AI technology, traditional machine learning, deep learning, they've been instrumental previously, but now LLMs are catapulting the field in various ways. So can you tell us what has driven so much attention to LLMs and what they've been able to achieve that the previous technologies haven't?
Yeah, so I think it's helpful to take a step back and look at the sort of historical picture here, as your question is sort of getting at. So LLMs were not new in 2020 when we were writing our paper, and then with our release of the paper in 2021. LLMs, or large language models, had been developed over the past I would say 5 to 10 years, depending on like what you're considering large. Before that, and then, in the 90s, language models, so not large language models, but language models were being developed for all kinds of tasks. And I was a part of a lot of this language modeling work. I did my thesis on generating language based on visual input, and this was using language models. And so I was in a position in 2020 where I was seeing that the growth of large language models, as opposed to more traditional language models, was introducing a ton of different issues and potential benefits, but a lot of issues that were being overlooked. Because in the tech industry, where I've worked for almost 15 years now, people tend to look at the positives and then they overlook some of the negatives. And so as someone who had been developing language models for a long time, I was seeing that they were about to take off, just from my specific position in the industry. And they were about to take off without any academic writing on harms and risks. So at the time, I was also working on something called model cards that document models. And in model cards, you need to document harms and risks. There was no academic resource for the harms and risks of large language models. And so, my colleagues and I decided we need to write that because we need to be able to cite it for other things, so we can move on to developing these systems further, so we can at least have this grounding in the full picture.
Makes sense.
The massive potential with language models that we saw at the time was that they were starting to be fluent. So previously, language models could be used for small chunks of text. Now language models, because they were large, were capable of capturing much larger contexts, and then that means that they could generate entire essays that sounded fluent in ways we could never do before. So once we started seeing that fluency, it was clear to us that people were going to start imbuing it with human-like intelligence. And this goes to, psycholinguistic works that span back decades. Not only that, the large paradigm was based on scraping tons of data without consent. So this opened up a whole bunch of other issues, like from the viewpoint of societal sort of rights and what's important to people, regardless of what the law sort of is. And so, the massive potential we saw at the time for these very fluent systems that could be used to generate things that look factual, and the assertion in these systems of an I, right? It uses the term I and me, which are, part of our human likeness. We use that as part of our own sort of expressions of humanness. It was really clear to me that people were going to love this, and they were not going to know the full picture about what these things actually are. So that sort of stimulated us to write that paper. And at the time, I think the general public didn't really know what language models were. They were surprised that Google responded to the paper so negatively. as were we, as the authors. I don't think it was completely well thought out. Now people are realizing, like, oh, they were getting at what's happening now. They were just, from within the vantage point of the tech industry, it was like a little easier to see what was going to happen. Yeah.